Montana Territory, late spring of 1879, clouds hanging low over the Bitterroot Mountains, snow still clinging to the peaks, and below, a battered woman with 2 children stood stranded on the edge of a muddy trail, clutching everything she had left in the world. Edda Rosefield pressed her palm to her son's back, shielding him from the wind, while her daughter tugged at her skirt with cold fingers. The wagon that had carried them this far lay broken in a ditch behind them, its axle snapped clean through. The man who had promised to help them get west had taken off at dawn with the last of their food and both horses. "Stay close," she whispered, drawing the children near. "We wait here. Someone will come." But she did not believe it. Not really. The boy Elias was 5. Little Ellie was barely 3. Edda had no family left. Her husband had died 2 winters ago in Kansas typhoid, and the neighbors stopped helping not long after. She had sold everything she owned for that wagon and the promise of a new start near Missoula. But now she had nothing. No food, no horse, no tools. Just 2 hungry children and a broken wheel. She dropped to her knees in the damp grass, pulled both kids against her, and held them close. Her lips grazed the top of Ellie's unwashed hair. Then hoofbeats. She lifted her head, unsure if she was imagining it, but they were real steady, slow, and close. A tall man rode up from the bend, his duster flapping behind him. He had eyes the color of river stone and a rifle strapped across his back. He was alone. He slowed when he saw them, then dismounted without a word. He scanned the scene-broken wagon, 2 small children, a woman with mud on her hem and hollowness in her eyes. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low. Edda shook her head. "No, just stranded." He looked at the wagon, then back to her. "You got food?" "No. Water." She reached for the canteen hanging from her belt. "Empty." The man nodded once, then pulled his own from his saddle and handed it to her. "Let the little ones drink first." Ellie clung to her leg. Elias took the canteen with shaking hands. "I am Folmer Vanett," he said, "coming back from delivering cattle down at Fort Owen. Saw your wagon from the ridge." Edda hesitated. "Edda Rosefield. This is Elias and Ellie." He crouched beside the wagon and touched the snapped axle. "This wheel is done. You will not get far like this." "I know." He looked at her again. Really looked. Something in his eyes softened. "You have people waiting for you?" "No." "Then you are going nowhere alone." He stood and walked back to his horse. "My place is 2 miles north. I have food, warm beds. You come with me. I will take you in." Edda stiffened. She had heard too many stories about men who offered help with one hand and took with the other. "You do not know me," she said. "I do not need to. Why would you help a stranger with nothing to offer?" His gaze held hers, steady and quiet. "Because you are not nothing, and those children deserve better than the cold." She hesitated, then nodded once. He helped her lift the children onto the saddle, then offered his hand. She took it. He led the horse while she walked beside him, her boots sinking into the wet trail. The mountain wind bit at her skin, but she felt warmer somehow, safer. The house sat in a clearing surrounded by pine, small but strong, with smoke curling from the chimney. A brown dog bounded out barking, but quieted when Folmer spoke. He lifted the children down and carried Ellie inside when she began to cry. The warmth of the hearth hit her like a wave. Folmer set a pot on the stove without a word and handed Edda a blanket. Elias curled up by the fire, half asleep. "Why live so far out?" she asked as he handed her a cup of coffee. "Some men like towns," he said. "I like quiet. I built this place with my brother. He died last spring. Now it is just me." She watched him move steady hands, quiet steps, and wondered what kind of man gave without asking anything in return. That night he gave her the bed. He slept in front of the fire. Edda lay awake listening to the wind and the slow, steady breath of her children sleeping beside her. When morning came, she found Folmer outside, chopping wood. "You do not have to keep us," she said as she stepped out onto the porch. He looked up. "I know. I have nothing to offer you." His eyes met hers again, and they were not cold at all. "You have already given me everything," he said. "You brought life into this house." She blinked. "I have been alone so long, Edda. I forgot what laughter sounded like, what it feels like to cook for someone other than myself. Watching Elias chase the dog or Ellie fall asleep in front of the fire. This house was just wood before you walked in." Her throat tightened. "I cannot pay you back. I am not asking for that." "Then why?" He set down the axe and stepped closer. "I do not want anything from you, but I would not mind earning your trust. And if that leads to more, then that is a blessing I never expected." Edda looked at him, really looked. He had a scar down the left side of his jaw. His knuckles were rough. He was not a man who spoke to fill silence, but every word he said mattered. And for the first time in years, she did not feel afraid. She nodded. That night, she sat beside him near the fire while the children slept upstairs. He poured her tea. Their hands brushed once. Neither pulled away. Folmer's hands were blackened with soot when Edda stepped out to fetch water from the spring behind the house. He'd been tending the stove since before the sun rose, smoke rising straight in the still morning air. She didn't ask what he was cooking. Something savory drifted out each time he opened the oven door, and her stomach answered for her. The spring ran clear beneath a thicket of alder, the bucket dipping with a hollow sound. Edda braced her boots against the damp earth, watching how the water lapped against the sides. The children were still asleep. She checked twice. Ellie curled beneath a quilt. Elias sprawled in the narrow cot beside her. She felt the ache in her shoulders before she even lifted the full bucket. It was dull, familiar, the kind of ache that came from years of lifting too much and resting too little. Her palms were raw from gripping the wagon rails. The skin at her knuckles had split. Folmer was splitting kindling near the barn when she returned, shirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. He didn't speak until she set the water down beside the door. "You're early," he said, not looking up. "I'm always early." He set the axe down and dusted off his hands. "You sleep any?" "Some." He nodded, then pointed to the smaller lean-to beside the barn. "I started clearing the storage room. Figure I'll move the tools out. Make space for the children." She didn't answer. "I don't mean to keep you longer than needed," he said, "but I've got extra hands now. If you want to stay, I'll make room proper." Edda let the morning quiet fill the space between them before answering. "You always take in strangers?" "No," he said, "just you." She studied the worn path from the door to the woodpile, where his boots had flattened the grass. It told a story of years lived in silence. She understood that kind of solitude. "I can sew," she said finally. "Men too, if you have things that need fixing." "I do." She looked up. "And I'm not afraid of work." "I never thought you were." Inside, the smell of baked cornmeal and salt pork filled the house. Folmer handed her a plate, then sat across the table, waiting until she took the first bite. "I'll head into Stevensville tomorrow," he said. "Get what you need. Cloth for the girl, maybe a better coat for the boy. They don't need new things. They need warm things." She set her fork down. "I don't want charity. I don't give it." She studied the lines around his eyes. "Then what do you call it?" He leaned back in his chair, voice low. "I call it choosing to care." She said nothing. After breakfast, Edda gathered the children's clothes and set to mending the worst tiers. Folmer worked outside, hammering boards into the lean-to walls, the rhythm of it steady. Elias followed him at a distance, fascinated. Folmer handed him a small mallet, showed him how to tap nails into soft wood. Edda watched from the window, thread between her fingers, heart tight. That night, after the children were tucked beneath fresh quilts Folmer had dug from a cedar chest, Edda lingered on the porch. The stars were thick above the trees, the sky wide and deep. Folmer joined her, handing her a mug of steeped herbs. "You've had a long week," he said. "It's been a long year." They stood in silence for a while. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine pitch. "Did you ever lose someone?" she asked. He didn't speak for a moment. "My brother," he said. "Last spring. Fever." She nodded. "My husband died during winter. Kansas was too cold for burying, but we did anyway. Hard thing. The hardest was realizing no one was coming after that. No help. No kindness." He looked at her, his voice quiet. "You don't have to carry all that alone now." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not sure I remember how not to." He didn't answer, just stood beside her as the wind moved through the grass and the dog settled near the steps with a huff. "You said something the other night," she said, not turning. "That I'd already given you everything. I meant it. You barely know me. I've seen enough." She turned to him then, eyes searching. "What is it you think you've seen?" He didn't hesitate. "A woman who doesn't quit. Who keeps her children fed when there's nothing left. Who walks through cold and fear and doesn't ask for more than she needs." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough she could feel the warmth of him. "Edda, I don't want to rescue you. I just want to build something with you if you'll let me." She looked down at her hands, rough and full of old pain. "I've got nothing to offer," she whispered. He reached out then, fingers brushing hers, gentle. "You've already given me everything." The next morning, frost clung stubborn to the fence rails, though the sun had begun its slow rise over the ridge. Edda stepped into the yard with a wool shawl wrapped close and Ellie pressed against her hip, still half asleep. Elias trailed behind, dragging a stick through the dirt with solemn concentration. Folmer was already at the corral, coaxing a reluctant bay gelding out of the shelter. He gave a low whistle when he saw them. "Dress warm," he called. "We ride to town." Edda hesitated. "All of us. Best way to get what fits is bring the ones who'll wear it." She looked down at Ellie's bare feet, red from the cold, and Elias's shirt stretched too tight across his shoulders. Then she nodded. By mid-morning, the four of them were mounted, Folmer with Elias on the saddle in front of him, Edda holding Ellie against her chest. The trail wound down through cottonwoods budding faint green, the bitter roots watching silent from the distance. The general store in Stevensville was a long, low building with a warped porch and a single bell over the door. Inside, it smelled of leather, tobacco, and flour. A woman behind the counter gave them a curious glance as they entered, eyes lingering on Edda's patched dress and the worn boots on the children's feet. Folmer tipped his hat and began gathering supplies, bundles of cloth, sturdy shoes, a tin of salve for cracked hands. Edda busied herself near the bolts of fabric, running her fingers over muslin and flannel with a kind of reverence. "You're not from around here," the woman said, folding a length of calico. "No," Edda replied, not offering more. "You his kin." Edda looked toward Folmer, who was crouched beside Elias, showing him the difference between two types of nails. "No," she said. Then, quieter, "Not yet." The woman nodded, something in her face softening. Outside, Folmer tied the bundles to the saddle while Edda lifted Ellie into his arms. He didn't speak until they were on the trail back. "Did you know," he said, "they've got a schoolhouse now?" Edda turned in the saddle just enough to see his face. "I didn't. Teacher's a widow from St. Paul. Said she can take 5 more children come fall." Edda glanced at Elias, who was watching a hawk circle far above them. He's never been in a classroom. Folmer adjusted the reins. Doesn't mean he can't start. Later, back at the homestead, Edda watched from the doorway as Folmer lifted the last of the feed sacks into the shed. The children played in the grass, Ellie chasing the dog while Elias tried to balance a stick on his nose. Edda stepped down onto the earth, the wind tugging loose strands of hair across her cheek. I used to think starting over was something you did once, she said. A clean break, but it's slower than that. Smaller. Folmer wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her. It's every fence post you set, she continued. Every garment you mend. Every time you decide to stay. He nodded. That's the only way I know how. She walked to him, her feet sure now. I want to help build this place, Folmer. Not just stay here, build something real. You already are. No, she said. Not just by being here. I mean with my hands. With what I know. I can teach the children their letters until school starts. I can help with the garden when it thaws. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping hers. I see you, he said. Not for what you've lost. For what you carry. And I'd be proud to walk beside you if you'll have me. She didn't speak, just let her head rest against his shoulder, the smell of pine and horses and home folding around her. Inside, the fire crackled low. The children's laughter drifted in through the open window. Folmer turned toward the door, but Edda held his hand a moment longer. Tomorrow, she said, I'll show you how to make a proper biscuit. The kind that doesn't come out flat. He grinned, a slow warmth reaching his eyes. I'd like that. They stepped inside together. The light was soft, and the air smelled of flour and cedar. Edda glanced down at the boots Folmer had picked for Ellie, sturdy, brown, and just a touch too big. She picked them up and knelt to fit them to her daughter's feet. Folmer brought over a small stool for Elias to sit and helped him tug on his new coat. It hung a little loose at the shoulders, but he'd grow into it. As dusk settled, Edda lit the oil lamp. Folmer fetched a book from the shelf, a book with worn corners and thumbed pages. He offered it to Edda, and she opened it across her lap, her voice weaving through the room as she read aloud. Folmer sat nearby, watching the children's eyes grow heavy, their breaths slow and even. When she finished, she closed the book and looked up at him. You said I brought life into this house, she said. But it was already waiting here. You just kept the door open long enough for us to find it. He didn't answer, just reached out, and this time she didn't hesitate. The thaw came slow that year. By mid-April, the creek behind the barn ran high and fast, churning with snowmelt. Edda stood barefoot at its edge, skirts pinned up, scrubbing Elias's shirt against the washboard. Her fingers were red from the cold, but she didn't mind it. She liked the sound of the water, the feel of the sun lifting the scent of pine sap from the trees. Behind her, Ellie toddled beside a row of half-turned soil, clutching a wooden spoon Folmer had carved down for her. He'd marked out the garden rows 3 days ago, a quiet gesture, and left a spade leaning near the porch. Edda had taken that as invitation. She rinsed the shirt and wrung it out, then straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. Folmer's dog barked once, and when she looked, she saw Folmer cresting the ridge line with a bundle of fence wire slung over one shoulder. You've been at it a while, he said as he reached her, setting the wire down. I've got 2 arms, she said. Seems a waste not to use them. He crouched beside the creek and dipped a tin cup into the water, drinking deep. I could build you a line out to the house, he said, wiping his mouth. Would save the walk. I don't mind the walk. It's quiet here. Folmer stood again, eyes sweeping the trees. This land's starting to settle, he said. Come summer, the ground'll be dry enough to run fence farther north. Might keep a few goats, if we can trade for 'em. She looked at him then. You thinking of staying? He raised an eyebrow. Been here 5 years. That's not what I mean. He set the cup down on a rock. No, I reckon it's not. She waited. I'm not drifting anymore, Edda, he said. Not since you came. Her throat tightened, but the words came easy. Then we'll plant potatoes past the fence line. And see about goats. That night, after the children were asleep, Edda stitched hems by the fire while Folmer cleaned the rifle he'd used to chase off a fox from the chicken coop 2 nights before. The silence between them was no longer uncertain, it had weight, like wool warmed by the body. Your boy's got a good eye, Folmer said, not looking up. For what? Noticed the fox tracks before I did. Pointed out the hollow where it crossed under the fence. Edda folded the finished shirt and set it aside. He watches everything. Always has. He's careful. That's good. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the fabric. He was speaking less after we left Kansas. I didn't know if it was fear or grief. Might have been both. She nodded. But he's speaking more now. Laughing too. Folmer looked across the fire at her. That's you, Edda. You gave that back to him. She shook her head. You've been here every day. You taught him how to hold a hammer, how to spot scat in the woods. That's you. They fell silent again, the fire snapping between them. He asked if we belonged here, she said after a while. Folmer leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What did you tell him? I said we do, but I wasn't sure if I had the right. He met her eyes. You do. How do you know? Because when he asked you. Not me. That tells me who he trusts. Edda swallowed hard. He's never had a man stay. He does now. She stood then, slow and certain, and crossed to him. Her hand brushed his shoulder, then rested there. He reached up, covering it with his own. I don't know how to be a wife again, she said quietly. I don't know what that means. Not after everything. Folmer rose, hand still holding hers. Then we won't try to be what was. We'll make something new, you and me. She looked up at him and he leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. They stood like that, no rush, no need for more. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, soft and steady. When the fire burned low, they banked the coals and carried the lamp upstairs. Edda paused at the children's door, listening to their breathing. Folmer waited behind her. She turned to him. There's room now, she said. If you want to stay. He didn't answer with words, just stepped forward and took her hand again. They crossed into the warmth of the shared room, where the window let in the shape of moonlight across the floorboards. She undid the pins in her hair, and he unbuttoned his cuffs. Everything between them was quiet, careful, and chosen, and in the hush of that Montana night, they lay down side by side. No fear between them, no past chasing at their heels, just the steady breath of a new life beginning. By early June, the last patches of snow had vanished from the shaded hollows, and the lower pasture grew thick with sweetgrass and lupin. Edda moved through the season like someone slowly remembering a language she'd nearly forgotten. Her hands had learned the rhythm of the place, kneading dough before sunrise, coaxing peas up from the soil, teaching letters with a soft-voiced patience at the kitchen table each morning. Folmer had cleared the northern fence line by then, the land opening out like a page they were still learning to write on. The children followed him often, Elias carrying a coil of twine or a bucket of nails, Ellie dragging her carved spoon through the dust, content to be near. One hot afternoon, Edda found Folmer in the shed sorting through a crate of old iron parts. She leaned against the doorframe, wiping her brow with the edge of her apron. You reckon that plow blade still turns? She asked. He held it up, squinting. Might, with a decent sharpening. Then let's see about sharpening it. He looked up at her, eyes catching on something quiet and sure in her face. You planning to drive the team too? If you'll hitch them. He set the blade aside and crossed to her. You surprise me, Edda. You shouldn't. I've been steady from the start. He rested a hand on the doorframe beside her. That's what surprises me most. How much of you I've come to lean on without even trying. She didn't flinch from his nearness. Then lean proper, Folmer Vanett. I'm not going anywhere. That evening, they ate on the porch. The table moved outside to catch the breeze. Ellie fell asleep with her cheek on Edda's lap, and Elias leaned against Folmer's leg, already half dreaming. The lantern burned low beside the bread tin, its glow catching the worn wood and the soft curve of Edda's arm as she stroked her daughter's hair. Folmer watched her, his voice steady. I want to marry you. Edda looked up, not startled, just quiet. I know it's been fast, he said, but I also know what it is. I've never had something come this clear. She touched his wrist. I don't need fast or slow, Folmer. I just need real. And it is. He nodded, breath easing out of him. Then I'll ride to town come Monday. Reverend stays on 4th Street now. I'll ask him what's needed. I'll bake the bread, she said, almost smiling. They married 2 weeks later under a cottonwood tree behind the house. Reverend Talmage brought his Bible and a tin of lemon drops for the children. The only other witnesses were the dog and a pair of red-winged blackbirds nesting in the eaves. Edda wore her mother's brooch, pinned at the throat of a dress she'd sewn from the blue calico Folmer had bought that first trip to town. Folmer shaved, wore the cleanest shirt he had, and pressed a hand to the small of her back as she stood beside him. I will keep you warm and fed, he said, voice low. I will keep you steady and seen, she answered. They kissed once, soft and long, the kind that settles something deep. Afterward, Edda sat beside him on the porch, her hand folded around his. The sun sank slow through the trees, casting the fields in gold. Elias lay in the grass with a book open across his chest. Ellie curled beside him, thumb in her mouth. Folmer spoke without turning. I've never wanted to be anything but useful in this life. Never thought there'd be room for more. There is now, Edda said. We made it. He turned toward her. You're my home. She rested her head on his shoulder. And you're mine. They sat like that until the stars came, until the children were asleep and the night turned cool and still. Then they rose together, carrying the lantern inside, and closed the door on the dark, with nothing but peace waiting on the other side. Years passed, and the land grew fuller around them. The children ran taller each season, their boots leaving deep prints in the earth. The garden stretched wider, the barn stood firm. Some winters were hard, some springs slow, but nothing ever felt empty again. Edda taught reading to the neighbors' girls once the schoolhouse filled too full. Folmer built a second pen behind the shed to hold the goats they'd finally traded for. They kept their promises to each other, not in grand ways, but in bread left warm on the stove, in fence rails mended before the storm, in the quiet way they reached for each other's hands come dusk. They grew old that way, and they were happy.